Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Happy Independence Day. Just in time for Independence Day. I promised you all that I was going to talk about the recent Supreme Court decision that came out last week that discussed birthright citizenship, but not really answer the question directly. So I'm here to talk about that and try to explain. It was not a quite clear ruling from the Supreme Court. So here to explain it. And I know there's a lot that's been happening since that time. And I know with our news cycles, maybe some folks may have already forgotten about this, but I know for a lot of people, this is still a very big concern and question. Is there still birthright citizenship in the United States? So let's get into it. And before we go forward, we gotta go back, right? And shout out to National Public Radio. I listened to a piece they discussing that ruling, and they really put it in a great context, like a really, really good context. So I'm going to, steal a little bit of how they talked about the issue. So let's go back a little bit. For those of you who might be familiar with the Dred Scott decision, if you're not familiar, it's basically a decision from, I believe, 1857. Don't quote me on the exact dates, but definitely pre-Civil War. Dred Scott and his wife were slaves in Missouri. They left Missouri, which was a slave state, moved to Illinois and lived there. Illinois and Wisconsin, free states for a couple of years, and they moved back. They eventually went back to Missouri. Long story short, they sued for their freedom. They lost. The Supreme Court basically said that African Americans, even though at that time some of them could vote, depending on what state they were living in, were not citizens of the United States. So all these kinds of things eventually led to the Civil War, but at that time, you basically had a patchwork of laws that applied differently to different people depending on where you live. So if you're an African American living in Philadelphia at the time, and of course some of you may know that Philadelphia was a home of many freed African Americans, you had a certain level of rights. But if you were living in the South, you were living in Missouri, you were not considered a citizen. So basically that Dred Scott decision basically reinforced this patchwork system of laws in the United States. All right, let's fast forward to today. What did the Supreme Court basically say in a nutshell? The Supreme Court basically said, because the case at issue really was about whether lower federal courts have the ability to tie the president. So can they stop the president from making law that will impact everybody? And the Supreme Court really only answered a very narrow question. And they said, no, a lower federal judge cannot make a ruling that impacts everyone in the nation. Or put it another way, they cannot tie the hands of the president. They can only make a ruling that impacts the plaintiffs in the case. And I think it's probably fair to assume that will extend to maybe the folks in their district, right? So because some of you might understand that the district courts, the lower federal court covers a particular district, then the middle tier, the circuit courts, they cover a circuit. So not to get too background into that, but the Supreme Court didn't actually talk specifically about birthright citizenship. It spoke about, the ruling was more about presidential powers. And how much power does the president have compared to a federal court? And they basically said, sorry, federal judges, you cannot tell the president what he can or can't do, who he can and can't rule over. You really have to be limited. Your rulings have to be limited to the particular case at hand. So basically, a federal judge cannot issue a nationwide injunction, because that's what had happened. As some of you hopefully are aware, the president issued this executive order, maybe the day one of his inauguration, trying to end birthright citizenship. We also know that that ruling, that executive order is being litigated because Supreme Court, see, is a lot of information. Even we lawyers don't know everything. The Constitution, 14th Amendment of the Constitution, enshrined birthright protections, in part because of Dred Scott and the situation where African Americans, no matter how they were born here for generations, were not given the full rights of citizenship. So they were barely treated as human beings. They were not even treated as human beings, as you know. The president essentially is trying to change the Constitution with an executive order, and I can't get into this discussion. That's a whole other discussion about whether somebody can even use an executive order to override the Constitution. My opinion is no, but that's for another day. So really, the Supreme Court punted. They did not get to the heart of the issue. Does birthright citizenship exist? Basically, the case is going to go back to lower courts, and judges, the federal judges, are going to have to make their rulings comply with what the Supreme Court said, which is this ruling has to apply to really the plaintiffs at hand, if they rule in favor of the plaintiffs, or at best at the district that the judge covers. Okay, it doesn't really talk specifically about whether the executive order that Trump announced earlier in this year is unconstitutional. They did not answer that question. So to answer the question, is birthright citizenship, has it been outlawed? I don't want to say that it has been, because what we really are looking at right now is we're looking at what we were looking at with the Dred Scott decision. We're looking at a patchwork system where if a federal judge in your particular area has ruled that the executive order is wrong, and that case is still being litigated, then your birthright citizenship still works where you are. But if in another place, in another district, the court has sided with maybe the president and said, no, this executive order is legit, again, the case is still being litigated, then where you are, birthright citizenship, you may have, somebody who is undocumented or is here only on a non-immigrant visa, gives birth to a child. That child may not be issued they'll be issued a birth certificate, all right, but they may not be given the rights and privileges of U.S. citizenship. So in a nutshell, the Supreme Court did not get to the heart of the issue. That's basically what the ruling said. And I really wanted to start with the Dred Scott discussion because it kind of emphasizes that we are basically kind of following a similar path. History is repeating itself here, where we are doing patchwork as opposed to, not to say that the president is not trying to make law that covers everybody, but the Supreme Court is not really there kind of avoiding talking about the real issue. Okay, so did this help you? Do you all understand? Do you have more questions? What are your thoughts on birthright citizenship? Do you feel that it should be outlawed? Do you think it should be should be kept? Do you feel that the Constitution, maybe you're not a constitutional scholar, but do you feel that the Constitution does protect the rights of anybody who's born here? Or do you feel that there's some wiggle room? Let me know. Let me know what you think. All right. Thanks. Take care.